Hey there, I thought I'd come on here and just quickly do a video. This one, I'm not sure what it's going to be called yet, but it'll probably be something along the lines of like shame and the status quo, or like veering away from the status quo. So shame comes from failing to meet societal norms. Dr. Sara Ahmed talks about this a lot in her work, how this idea that if you deviate from the status quo, chances are a lot of shame is being projected onto you, directed onto you. You might even just be feeling it yourself as well too. So first we have to talk about what the status quo and the societal norms are. So I live in Turtle Island, which is now known as the Americas. Specifically, I live in Canada. So here, the status quo is influenced by major players like religious institutions, corporations, the media, our friends, our family, our peers. These people put messaging into our heads around what is quote unquote normal, right? What rules of engagement? How do you conduct yourself in Canada? Laws also direct a lot of this as well too, right? And so here where I live, it tells us, as well as I'm sure in a lot of different places as well too, it tells us that a man and a woman, they get together, they start courting, they eventually get married, then they buy a house, you start having babies, you should find work. Now we're seeing that there's new child labor laws that are telling us that you can start work earlier. Um, and children are being pushed to work earlier by laws. What else? Once you get a job, you start saving money, which then you spend on products. You become a consumer. You start buying a lot of different things: clothes, foods, cars. You're supposed to buy a house. Basically, we're told boy meets girl, boy marries girl, boy and girl have kids, boy and girl make money, boy and girl spend the rest of their lives saving for retirement, which comes after 60, right? So growing up, when I was growing up, education was a huge part of the status quo, right? You were told you need to, in order to get a job, the ticket to getting a job was to going to college or university. So that's something that I did because it was just like the natural transition. Although that's not necessarily the case for my siblings, and so we have to also talk about gender, who is supposed to really follow the status quo and who's not. I know in like West African or even African culture, I've seen Nigerians talk about the same thing where education is key, right? You're supposed to be a doctor, you're supposed to be an engineer, you're supposed to be a lawyer. I felt a lot of that pressure. I still kind of deviated from that and did social sciences, which I was supposed to be ashamed of because that is not the status quo in terms of like what is the best thing for you to do. Again, others, that was not necessarily the same case for others in my family who were able to drop out of college or university or never went in the first place. That specifically was very like gendered. It was like you as the firstborn, you as a girl, you as a daughter, you're supposed to do all of these things, become a lawyer, become a scientist, become a doctor. And I did none of those things, right? Which once you deviate from that, that is going to bring shame. Whether other people are shaming you, whether you aren't shaming you. So we're going to get into that a little bit. So even if you choose to go a different path, and you're not taking the most popular route, that'll automatically bring some sort of shame onto you. Again, so like even if you do go to university, but you choose to do English or the arts, that's going to bring some sort of shame because you're deviating from what the traditional path is supposed to be, right? Um, or again, for some women, I can also get away with social sciences because it was seen that women aren't necessarily getting into STEM when I was growing up. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, right? Those weren't necessarily girls streams, and so that could bring you shame in a different type of way. If you were a woman that was studying the sciences or the mathematics, engineering, not so much now, even though it's still there, but you know, in the 90s, the 2000s, if you were doing that, that is deviating from the norm. Women weren't supposed to do those things, and so some sort of shame is going to be projected onto you because why? Again, you're deviating from it, right? That's a function of shame. Shame keeps you in line. Shame is a sense of like, I have violated community conduct. The community does this. This is what everybody does. This is the normal. Everybody gets married, In a heterosexual relationship, everybody has kids, everybody finds a job, everybody works, everybody saves up money for college, everybody buys a house, everybody does this, right? This is a societal norms. This is a normal thing that you're supposed to do. As soon as you deviate from that, that's going to bring some sort of shame onto you, right? Even if you're completely successful, even if you're an artist and you're really successful, people aren't going to see that as success. Um, Even if you're completely content with your life, right? A lot I see, I follow folks and even the channel that I would have interviewed for, which are just saying, nope, we're exiting the rat race. We are slowing down. We're moving slow. We are traveling the world. We're not doing what everybody else does. That is supposed to bring you a lot of shame. Why? Because as soon as you deviate, that shame is supposed to function as to bring you back on course. Shame is meant to keep you in line, to be like, oh, I feel so awful. Everybody's looking at me. Everybody's shaming me. I feel so humiliated. Let me go get a job. Let me go marry a man. Let me get married. Let me have kids. Let me do these things to make sure that I'm following, quote unquote, the rules, right? I'm doing what everybody's told me to do. I'm following what the priests and the nuns and the imams and the rabbis and the politicians, these major players who really tell us what the rules are based on biblical texts, based on religious texts, based on laws, based on whatever. We're supposed to follow those things. And if you don't do that, you are going to get shamed. And depending on who you are, you might get shamed heavily, right? This can actually work out in two ways. You either go inward with that shame or you externalize that shame outwards. So in the first one, we channel the shame inwards by thinking that we're not good enough, right? Oh, I failed at this societal norm. Man, I didn't get into college or university. I was just watching the most recent season of Never Have I Ever, I think it was. And they were all applying for college admissions and so on and so forth, right? So not getting college acceptance letter, that would be something that you're going to internalize that shame. You're going to feel like you're not good enough. You're going to start to shrink. Davy was feeling some of that. She hid it from her mom. Shame. She didn't even tell people. She completely lied about it. That's shame. You're hiding it, right? It's embarrassing to tell people that you didn't get into college when that's what you're supposed to do. She ended up lying. You hide, you play small. We might talk ourselves out of creating our own path, right? So that's not the path that you really want. If you never wanted to go to university in the first place, if you never wanted to get a master's or a PhD, but this is what you're told you're supposed to do, you might not follow but you want to do something else. You want to become an actress. You want to become a gardener. I don't know what are jobs that people look down on. Whatever it is, that's going to bring some sort of internalized shame. You're going to internalize it, right? That might make you wear masks. You might pretend to be something that you're not. Again, in the episode of Never Have I Ever with the college thing, you're telling people you got accepted into all these universities and you're doing this next year, and that's not actually the case at all. You're pretending, you're performing for others. This might look like doing what others want you to do. You start following what your parents tell you need to do. You start following what your church community says to do, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I'm not saying don't listen to your parents. I'm not saying don't listen to the principal or the administrators or the politicians or the laws. I'm not saying that, but I'm also saying that. Right? I'm saying figure out what it is that you need to do for you and have that courage. And that's where I am right now. I'm stuck in this, am I brave enough? Am I courageous enough to follow what it is that my path is? Or am I just going to end up doing what everybody else does and what everybody else tells me to do because that's the comfortable and the good way. Recently, I came across a list of my alumni from my high school, a list of names of people who graduated at the same time as I did, and I started Googling some of them to see where we all are. And it's really interesting. Those who followed the path, those who followed the rules, they got married young, they had kids, they got work, or they married somebody who was working. It looks like they're living their lives. It's easy. They bought homes, they have children, like they followed the path. Even if they deviated somehow, it's much easier. If you follow the path, it's much easier. Once you start getting into unconventional territories, once you start to veer off the beaten path, that's when life is much harder, right? And it's going to be much harder intentionally because it keeps you on the path. If you are struggling to find work as an artist, getting a 9 to 5 is going to be very desirable, right? If everybody's shaming you because you don't have kids, having kids is going to be a very desirable thing. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't want these things if that's what you want. That's not shame either. But for those who choose to live an unconventional life, it's much more difficult when you decide to go your own way, right? Um, Internalizing that shame might mean like you're self-deprecating. We again, like I said, we don't think that we're enough. It comes inwards. The second way it can happen is we allow our shame to negatively disrupt our relationships with others. We start to project it outwards, that shame, right? So you don't get into college, all of a sudden you're shaming people who went to college. Careful, careful, please be careful. You're shaming those who went to college, or maybe you got it here in Canada. College and universities is really different than in the States. I think colleges there is also the same as university, whereas here it's very elitist. It's very like if you got into college, it's seen as like lesser, is more practical, hands-on. This is not necessarily the case, but you might, if you might shame somebody because they're going to college and they're, I don't know, for whatever reason, you start making fun of other people. You start shaming them. You get really passive aggressive. I could be really passive aggressive. That's something I've been noticing the last few days and trying to work on and I've always known that I'm passive aggressive. And another thing I wanted to know is like it can be really annoying to meet people. We really don't like to see ourselves in others. So for me, the example of being passive aggressive, I can be very passive aggressive with my communication, all of that, right? As soon as I see somebody else who's just as passive aggressive, guess what we usually do? We're like, oh my God, they're so passive aggressive. And we start to like knock and shame them. When meanwhile, that's the same thing we want to do. But if, you know, so yeah, basically we start projecting our insecurities onto others. We start projecting our fears onto others. If we never stuck to our own path, then we see somebody doing it and we're like, who do they think they are? They think they're better than us. How come you decided not to get married? Like, who do you think you are? We start shaming homophobia. People are not marrying in a heterosexual context. We start persecuting them. Hate crimes might show up here. We just start putting fear into other people. You're not good enough. You're never going to make it. This is just a pipe dream. This is a delusion. This is, we just keep telling people that they can't do it because we were too afraid to do it. We might smear them. We get really competitive. We get really judgmental. So those are the two ways. We either internalize it or we externalize it. And that's all I wanted to say. Is don't forget that shame is all about power, control, and domination. It's all about, it makes you want to stay in line and to stay the course. To be quote unquote normal, to do what everybody else is doing, to do what the politicians are telling you to do what the religious affiliations are telling you to do what your parents are telling you to do. And that's not saying that they're telling you to do. Sometimes what it is bad. Because like if they're telling you, anyways, that's a whole other conversation. But I don't want to get into here. This is meant to manipulate you. What else? Veering off the beaten path is something unconventional. It will come with a lot of shame, especially if the more you deviate from the path, the more you're going. I was just started watching Glamorous on Netflix. I just started episode 2, and you see it there, right? Like the mom wanting them to get the traditional job. You got to start working, and that's good advice. You do need money. You have to grow up. You need to adult, right? So I'm not saying not to do these things, but it could be harder. Like if that's not what you want, if you're a person who doesn't want to follow the traditional path, that might be a little bit more difficult. So that's all I wanted to talk about is like, think about, first of all, you have to think about what the status quo is, what is quote unquote normal. And if you are deviating from that, chances are you're going to run up against a lot of shame because that is the function of shame, right? As soon as you deviate from societal norms, you're going to get shame coming to you because it's meant to push you back into doing what everybody else is supposed to do. So until next time, in solidarity.